It's been 100 days since the war began in Ukraine. It has turned out to be the deadliest war of Europe in decades. Here's a look back to these 100 days.
It all started with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's appeal to US President Joe Biden to grant his country's entry to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. It was January 2022. 2 months before this appeal, satellite images taken by US company Maxar Technologies showed ongoing buildup of Russian forces near Ukraine. The troop deployment soon surpassed the strength of 100,000. That was November 2021. Within a month, on 17 December, Russia presented security demands including that NATO pull back troops and weapons from Eastern Europe and bar Ukraine from ever joining it. Within a month, when Zelensky appealed for NATO membership, it provided the so-called legitimacy to what Russian president was about to do. When questioned about Russian troop deployment in Belarus, Kremlin replied, saying it was routine training exercise. On 24 January, NATO put its forces on standby and reinforced Eastern Europe with more ships and fighter jets. 2 days later, Washington responded to Russia's security demands. It repeated a commitment to NATO's open-door policy while offering a pragmatic evaluation of Moscow's concern. It did not pacify Russia. It claimed that its demands were not addressed. As January turned to February, the United States of America announced that it would send 3,000 extra troops to Poland and Romania, the bordering countries of Ukraine and Russia, but none of the NATO allies would send troops to Ukraine. Instead, they warned Russia of several economic sanctions if it was to act militarily against Ukraine. The stage was set and the ball started to roll. 21st February 2022. Russian president in a televised address said that Ukraine was an integral part of its history and that it was run by a puppet regime manipulated by external foreign powers. Vladimir Putin recognized the two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, as sovereign republics and marched his peacekeeping troops into the region. 22nd February 2022. The US, UK and their allies declared sanctions on Russian parliament members, banks and other assets in response to Putin's troop order. Germany halted the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project. 23rd February 2022. Russian-backed separatist leaders of Donetsk and Luhansk in East Ukraine asked Russia for help to repel aggression from the Ukrainian army. 24th February 2022. Russian President Vladimir Putin authorized a special military operation in Ukraine. Russian forces began missile and artillery attacks, striking major Ukrainian cities, including the capital city of Kyiv. Putin in his broadcast justified his special military operation as an attempt to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky responded with a tweet saying that Russia had embarked on a path of evil, but Ukraine is defending itself. And that was day one of this war. 1st March 2022. A mile-long Russian armored column leading up to the capital city of Kyiv is found beset by logistical problems. Russia hits a TV tower in Kyiv and intensifies its long-range bombardment of Kharkiv in the northeast and other cities. 2nd March 2022. Russian forces start a siege of the southern eastern port of Mariupol. It is considered vital to Moscow's attempts to link the eastern Donbas region with Crimea. Russia annexed the Black Sea Peninsula in 2014. Its troops entered and captured the Black Sea port of Kherson. It became the first large Ukrainian urban center captured by Russia. 1 million people fled Ukraine as the war intensified and dragged on. 4th March 2022. Russian forces seized Europe's biggest nuclear plant, Zaporizhzhia, the very day NATO rejected Ukraine's appeal for no-fly zone. They said this appeal could escalate the conflict further. 8th March 2022. On the first ever attempt to create a humanitarian corridor, Ukrainians fled the northeastern city of Sumy. UNHCR estimated 2 million people fled Ukraine in the first 13 days of the war. 9th March 2022. Ukraine accused Russia of bombing a maternity hospital in Mariupol. It buried people in the rubble. Russia countered, saying that Ukrainian fighters were occupying the building and not them. 13th March 2022. Russia extended its penetration deep into western Ukraine. It fired missiles at a base near the border with NATO member Poland. 16th March 2022. Ukraine accused Russia of bombing Mariupol theatre, where hundreds of civilians had taken shelter. Moscow denied it. 25th March 2022. Moscow signaled a shift in focus to making gains in the east, while Ukrainian forces pressed to recapture towns outside Kyiv. US President Joe Biden visited a refugee camp of Ukrainians in Poland. Standing mere 60 miles from the Ukrainian border, he said that Russian President Vladimir Putin cannot remain in power. The US administration later clarified that President Biden wasn't calling for a regime change in Moscow. 30th March 2022. UNHCR announced that more than 4 million people fled Ukraine in the first month of the war. April 2022. Ukraine accused Russia of war crimes after a mass grave and bodies of people shot at close range were found in the recaptured town of Bucha near the capital city of Kyiv. Kremlin denied responsibility and said the images of bodies were staged. 8th April 2022. Ukraine blamed Russia for a missile attack on a train station that killed at least 52 people. The train was reportedly carrying people fleeing the looming eastern offensive. Moscow denied the charge. 14th April 2022. The spearhead Russian naval attack in the Black Sea, the Moskva sinks. Ukraine claims that its missile strike caused Moskva to sink. Russia blamed an ammunition explosion as the cause. 18th April 2022. Russia launches a campaign to seize 2 provinces of Donetsk and Luhansk. Ukraine describes it as the Battle of Donbass. 21st April 2022. Putin declares Mariupol liberated after nearly 2 months of siege. However, hundreds of Ukrainian defenders hold out inside the city's huge Azovstal steelworks. 25th April 2022. Ukrainian neighbor country Moldova's pro-Russian breakaway region says blasts hit one of its ministries and 2 radio masts. It blamed Ukraine. In response, Kyiv accused Moscow of staging the attacks to try to widen the conflict. 28th April 2022. Ukraine blamed Russia for firing 2 missiles into Kyiv during a visit by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Kremlin accused Ukraine of attacking Russian regions near the border. 1st May 2022. About 100 Ukrainian civilians are evacuated from Mariupol's ruined Azovstal steelworks. The United Nations calls it a safe passage operation. 7th May 2022. As many as 60 people were killed after a bomb strikes a village school in eastern Ukraine. 9th May 2022. Putin exhorts Russians to battle in a defiant Victory Day speech, but he remains silent about plans for any further military escalation in Ukraine. 10th May 2022. Ukraine says its forces have recaptured villages north and northeast of Kharkiv in a counter-offensive. 12th May 2022. UNHRC announced that more than 6 million people have fled Ukraine in 77 days of ongoing war. 14 May 2022. Ukrainian forces launched a counter-offensive near the eastern Russian-held town of Izium. 18 May 2022. On the 83rd day of the war, two Nordic countries, Finland and Sweden, applied to join NATO. 20th May 2022. Ukraine's President Zelensky asked his military defenders to get out of Azovstal steel works in Mariupol and save their lives. Few hours later, Russia announced the last of Ukrainian fighters holding out at Mariupol's Azovstal steel works have surrendered. 21st May 2022. Russia launches an offensive in one of the Donbas provinces to push Ukraine away from Luhansk. 23rd May 2022. A young Russian tank commander is sentenced to life in prison for killing an unarmed civilian in the first war crimes trial of the conflict by a court on Kyiv. 25th May 2022. Putin signed a decree that simplified the process for residents of newly captured districts of Ukraine to acquire Russian citizenship and passports in a bid to solidify Moscow's grip on the seized territory. 29 May 2022. As Russian forces appear close to seizing the entire Luhansk region after days of slow but steady gains, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov calls the liberation of Donbas an unconditional priority for Moscow. 31st May 2022. Local officials announce it is no longer possible to evacuate trapped civilians. Ukrainian forces are still holding out, but much of the city is under Russian control. 1st June 2022. Russia criticizes US decision to supply advanced rocket systems to Ukraine, warning it could widen the conflict and increase the risk of direct confrontation with Washington. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Ukraine had given assurances it will not use the systems against targets on Russian territory.